Let's get started with some brief introductions because we have a lot of good content here. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for our third installment of the Skystone Partners 2022 On Giving webcast, Incisive Commentary and Analysis at the Intersection of Philanthropy and the Greater Good. Again, I'm Liz Knuppel, President and CEO of Skystone Partners, where we believe philanthropy is a powerful force for good. And our two guests have just hopped in. So glad to see you both. I'm proud to welcome you and our attendees. Lisa New is the President and CEO of Zoo Knoxville. And David Walsh is the President and Chief Advisor of Canopy Strategic Partners. Hello, David, and hello, Lisa. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Liz, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Absolutely glad to have you. And David and Lisa really do exemplify the best of the best in organizational leadership and management, strategic planning and direction. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about them so you know the quality of folks that you've got here in front of you and kind of what you've gotten into. First of all, Lisa New. Lisa was appointed the president and CEO of Zoo Knoxville in May 2013. And with a graduate degree in ethology, which is animal behavior, focusing on great apes, Ms. New has long been fascinated in the natural world and sustainable solutions for the future of wildlife, especially conservation strategies that engage local communities to support and peacefully cohabitate with wildlife through education and economic opportunities. In late 2013, Ms. New launched a bold strategic plan for Zoo Knoxville that ignited the community. And Zoo Knoxville, full disclosure, is a former client of Skystone Partners. We were pleased to collaborate with them on their $37 million Dream Wilder capital campaign. And it encompassed the largest construction projects in the zoo's history and have been implemented, featuring new and engaging habitats for animals as well as for the guests. Since 2015, the zoo has annually broken attendance records with growth over 30%, and with 2021 on track to welcome 550,000 guests. Now, Lisa, you're well beyond that benchmark as well. Habitats and guest spaces are winning multiple awards and they've been opening new habitats and guest experience opportunities, including the Boyd Family Asian Trek for tigers, gibbons, langurs, and a new cafe. The Clayton Family Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Campus opened in 2021, which features animals and conservation that work that Zoo Knoxville is best known for in herpetology. So building a destination experience that serves as a catalyst for the city's growth is an anchor attraction for the community and is a key initiative for Lisa and her passion in inspiring people to care about wildlife and wild places. Lisa, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And David, let me tell you all a little bit about our friend, David Walsh. Again, David's the president and chief advisor, and he's spent his career connecting organizations with the people and ideas to help them grow. David founded Canopy Strategic Partners to help cultural attractions, zoos, museums, and botanic gardens find the intersection between mission and margin. He's assembled a team of accomplished conservation professionals, researchers, and industry leaders committed to using their expertise to help mission-driven organizations create a better future for our planet. Prior to Canopy, David led new products and business development at Petco Energy and Verizon Communications. He launched 2 successful startup companies, and he left the corporate world to pursue his passion for helping nonprofits imagine a future and a plan for it. David, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation today, and welcome.
Thank you, Liz.
Excellent. Excellent. So before we begin our conversation, I'd like to touch on just a couple of housekeeping things. So ladies and gentlemen, just so you know how we're running things, when we walked in the door, we had a couple minutes to say hello in the chat feature. David and Lisa will give us some insights about their experiences, but we're going to be turning the chat feature off. We'll have a few minutes for questions, and we'd like you to submit your questions to David and Lisa via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So there is the chat feature where you said hello. We're delighted to see you here. Then we'll be switching over to Q&A. Our question moderator for the day is Sally Lehman, who is a member of the Skystone Partners team and serves as a member of the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden Foundation Board. She'll be receiving your questions and curating them behind the scenes so that we have as much opportunity to answer as many of your questions without duplication. So Sally's behind the scenes, but she'll join us for Q&A. So down to business. As you know, every organization requires funds to deliver its mission with excellence, and private philanthropy is a critical portion of most nonprofits' total revenue, whether it's a government-owned entity or fully privately owned. To attain the type of philanthropic results that Big Vision requires, strategic planning is the single most important activity an organization can undertake. In fact, it's the first step in all successful fundraising. So with that in mind, David, I'd like to toss it over to you so that we can level set and make sure we're all speaking the same language. Can you take a minute to just share with us a little bit about what strategic planning is and what it's not?
Yes, thanks again, Liz. Yeah, I'll give you the overview. And language is so important as part of any strategic planning process. It's one of the things we do with all of our clients and engagements is to set those common terms. And I'll talk about some of those in a couple minutes here. But when we talk about strategic planning, we start off, and a lot of people, there are some people that roll their eyes about strategic planning. They're like, oh God, I don't want to do this. I like to think of them as more of, they like to jump in and they're the doers. They want to really get into the action very quickly. Mm-hmm. But there's another group, and we always have them as part of our engagements that they're like, oh, I love strategic planning. They are the planners. They like to really to look forward. And we think a strategic plan is really so important because if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. And really, at its simplest form, strategic planning is getting everybody on the same page. It's getting your staff, your leadership team, your board, all singing from that same song sheet. And that is so critical, especially as you go off on some bigger initiatives like a fundraising campaign, like a new capital project. But it's getting everybody on that same page and building that common direction, that guiding direction, and really identifying a North Star for everybody to rally behind. And that's a term we use a lot in our planning, is defining what your North Star is and what your common purpose is. And some of the terms that you'll hear as part of strategic planning, the terms are important, but really the meaning behind those are even more important. First, we start off with your mission, which is really defines who you are as an organization. And some people are like, well, don't you always know kind of who you are and why you exist? We've gone into planning sessions where they think that, oh yeah, we don't have to worry about a mission. We all know, but when you start asking everybody, and I'll talk about that later, you don't know, you're not always on that same page. And so coming to find that common ground is so critical to moving to the next phase, which is your vision, which is defining really where you want to go. It's really that aspirational reach, and that's so important because it creates the excitement from all of your stakeholders. And then the last piece are goals and objectives, sometimes referred to as strategic commitments, but that's the how you get there. And for those doers, they really like to see those details of the goals and objectives. So you put it all together, but really all of that works to really help setting some common priorities and focus areas for the organization. And that's really critical because a plan is not only what you're going to do, but it's also what you're not going to do. It's the stop doing list, and that can be really critical as part of it. And the last piece I'll share before turning it back over is kind of what a strategic plan is and what it isn't. That strategic plan is really that guiding vision for the organization, but it helps inform some of the other plans that also often get confused with a strategic plan. A strategic plan is not your master plan, which is typically the facilities and campus design. That's you work with architects and designers on those plans. It's usually the what gets people really excited because they get to see something tangible. But a good strategic plan informs your master plan. And what it's also not, it's not a business plan. It's not the finances. It's not the revenue and expenses. But your strategic plan should inform both your master plan and your business plan. We see all of those pieces working together then to define your fundraising strategy, your marketing and branding strategy. All of those pieces work together. But we're firm believers that you need a good, solid strategic plan that gets that common direction, gets everybody working together to help inform all of those plans and set a strong foundation for the fundraising and going out and asking your stakeholders for their support. So Those are the different pieces of it.
Thank you. That was really helpful, David. And so I guess just to summarize, your strategic plan is your map, and the roads that you're driving on might be the result of your master plan, for example. But if we all have the same view and we all agree upon our destination, the likelihood that we're going to get there increases dramatically. And with that North Star, then you can start making those plans for what you want your facilities to look like. And then supporting that, what's the business plan? How are we going to get there? Earned revenue, philanthropic revenue, and the like. That's pretty good synopsis, yes?
That's a good synopsis, yes.
Excellent. Good. Well, Lisa is here today to bring some real world experience from her seat as the leader of Zoo Knoxville. And I really look forward to hearing more from Lisa about her experience relative to strategic planning and the success with the Dream Wilder campaign. And Lisa, I'd like to turn it over to you because you had a $30 million goal for Dream Wilder. You busted through it. You raised $37 million. How did strategic planning contribute to Zoo Knoxville being so successful in its campaign? And what were some of the most important factors or key lessons along the process that got you there?
Sure. Well, thanks, Liz. And I have to say, we worked with Canopy, then Zoo Advisors, on our strategic plan. And as David was talking about the process, I was reminded of how we revisited all of those things as we began to develop a strategic plan. So a little bit about the background and history of that. When I got the job at the same time, or very shortly after, within a couple of months, we had a new board chair. And it was the board chair's really requirement to take on the role of chair, was to go through a strategic planning process. And that was very important to me as well, because we had no roadmap. We had quite a few years of disjointed sort of random planning, just like David said. If you don't know where you're going, you don't know where you'll wind up. And we were seeing that. We were having sort of random development throughout the park and throughout our organization as a whole. And so strategic planning was a way to give us that roadmap, to give us that North Star, of which an overall capital campaign was just a piece of it. So we did We did have exercises in core values, and not aspirational values, but core values. Who are we, not who do we want to be? And that was something that we still use today. In every orientation, we talk about our core values. It was very unifying for the staff. And then the same with mission and vision. We revisited mission and vision and decided that we wanted a new look on life. We wanted it to, every word's very deliberately crafted. And now, now 10 years later, we're at a point where I think I'm ready to revisit that. I think it's an important thing to remember that they're living documents and they evolve over time, and sometimes they run their course. So, as part of the strategic planning process, we brought in experts from the cultural attractions and event space, as well as the zoo and aquarium industry. They came in and looked at our operations as a whole, but as we shift now from overall strategic planning to master planning and how that folds into fundraising, having that team come in was a real critical eye-opener for us. So they came through and they had never been to our zoo before, and they looked through the campus with a very critical lens, and then came back and told us what they saw, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we were very receptive to hearing that. It was part of our growth process. Our strategic planning committee wasn't just zoo staff. We had it was a combination of board leadership as well as zoo leadership, and that all of that was very unifying for our board, especially bringing on a new director and a new chair and moving all of us toward one common vision. So that outside group that came in was key, but another thing that was key was talking to our community. And so asking our community, what do you love about the zoo? What do you not love about the zoo? What would you like us to be? And we got really critical information during that process. And so I'd like to share the screen just briefly to show you what that master plan ultimately, use my proper words, what that strategic plan ultimately looked like, because it did inform our fundraising campaign. So hopefully you see the screen, I'm assuming, yes.
Yes.
So one of the things that came out of our strategic plan and really was our North Star is the infographic that you see there. And all of those elements became key objectives and goals within our strategic plan. So, we had the prime areas of our brand. We knew we needed to define and refresh our brand. We knew that guest experience was a key piece of what we did. And of course, the exhibits that we showcased to our guests. And then we had all these external influences that were driving that process, our customers, key stakeholders, and our core values. In the middle of that, the heartbeat of that is our staff and our volunteers who make all of those things happen. And then very important to our board and to our leadership was that it was built on a firm business foundation, no margin, no mission. We have got to run a good business in order to deliver on our mission. And so I promise not to go through all of this with you, but I did want to go down to show you again, things that drove the fundraising. Guest experience being very important. We wanted to live a brand that reflected our culture and our values. But then we had the goal of exhibits, which morphed into our master plan and then our fundraising. So our exhibits were to delight our guests with animals, grounds, and amenities that are appealing, educational, immersive, and safe. and create a special place that's hard to leave. And as part of that, of course, we're lots of goals and objectives, and being sure that we look through all of that in our development. And so we did. And so one key point or key factor that came out of that then informed our fundraising was our campus assessment. And I'll share the screen one more time. So if you remember that infographic that I had put up before, we used that infographic to drive our campus planning and our master planning. And so we evaluated each and every exhibit or habitat within our organization on two factors, one being guest experience. How do guests feel about it? Are the animals engaging? Are they popular? And then also on the habitat itself, the quality of the exhibit. And those together formed a composite score, if you will, of red, yellow, and green. Red being not too good on guest experience, not too good on the quality of the exhibit. It became an urgent priority. Red meant you've got to do something now. Yellow meant really the quality of the exhibit might be okay, but the quality for guest experience, people love these animals. Think about river otters and gibbons and things like that. And so yellow became really areas of opportunity or things that were okay right now, but would need assessment in the future. And then finally, green was our crown jewels, the things that would need upkeep and maintenance in our campus, but by and large, we're fine for the time being. So you're looking at a map of our zoo campus at the time, and then how that priorities that we went through during the strategic plan and subsequently the master plan to develop the priorities of our capital campaign. And so that's a little bit of the background, but to your question of how did strategic planning contribute to the overall fundraising, it was a process. And I'm not a process person. I'm the one David talked about that wants the to-do list. It just wants to get busy. It's messy. It is circular in many ways. It's maddening, but it's a good process at the end when you come out with this roadmap for the future. And so how that was critical to our fundraising is it was an integral piece. It didn't come first. In the past, without a strategic plan, we had been just randomly fundraising and created really a very disjointed campus. And I think our consultants called it that we had pockets of greatness, but we lacked cohesion. And this master plan folded the goals of what we wanted out of the campus into that overall strategic plan of building a solid and firm business, focusing on a new brand, on guest experience and quality of habitat. So it folded right into that. And then as we went into fundraising, what was really key to our donors and stakeholders was that we had this vision. So it was very unifying to the board and the community overall to be part of that whole process. But for our donors and our philanthropic efforts in the Dream Wilder campaign, because it was so integrated with a business plan and all of those other pieces, they saw that there was real expertise and deliberate strategy behind it.
I love that, Lisa. And one of the things that I so appreciate about everything that you've shared with us just now is that final map. And it's one of my favorite documents that you've got, because it so clearly represents this is where we need attention now. It pointed you in a direction, and it was the coming together. Words that I've heard both David and you use as it relates to this is it was unifying. It brought our community together. Our stakeholders had a voice, and we identified what it was that was important in a way that just zoo leadership or just the board or just one constituency couldn't have done it on its own. And it truly became this community process, which for an organization like a cultural attraction like Zoo Knoxville is so critical, because you are that member and a true driver in the Knoxville community, economically, culturally, and otherwise. That it felt messy, but it came to this pinnacle of a beautiful, simple, and genius representation that you could show to anybody and say, here's our priorities, you know?
Yes, and I'll also say that many of those things, from our core values to the campus assessment graphic that I just showed, to the infographic, ultimately a business plan, all folded into our overall master plan and our case for support. So as we went out into feasibility studies and subsequently a capital campaign, we were able to tie all those things together to say, you know, our strategic plan called for this, and here is what we've done to build this foundation. We've launched a master plan that was, you know, a vision from our board and our community. And now we are undertaking fundraising. And if you help support us, here's what our performa and business model shows. It will give back to the organization and to the community. And so all of that made it a very cohesive and tight case for support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And so basically what you're saying is good due diligence, good business practice shows donors you're stewarding their contributions well, their time well, their thoughts well. And I'd like to segue a little bit over to David, which of course results in exceptional fundraising and being able to exceed your goal by, I don't know, 23, 30%, something pretty amazing. I'd like to sort of toss it over to David and say, you know, we've talked a bit about how both strategic planning and it has affected the outcomes, of the fundraising outcomes of Zoo Knoxville. David, can you talk a little bit? Lisa referenced the process as she referred to, you know, what came out to be the overall master plan, but can you give us some details, like how do we do this? If we're seeking to raise a ton of money for a big vision, how do we start? How do we move through? Who's important to engage along the way, and when?
Sure. Yeah. And I first want to say, Lisa and the Zoo Knoxville team, we hold up as the model client. Lisa has just checked through all of the boxes of starting with the strategic plan, doing master planning, doing the business plan, branding, fundraising. And we hold it up as that model because we do think it's a great process to follow. Of starting that way. And so a couple of things that we think about from a process standpoint. First, just kind of keys to kind of overall philosophy from a process. First is really being inclusive, in listening to all voices. And Lisa referenced that of hearing from her board, hearing from her community, hearing from the staff, and starting with the staff. And I think that's a very important place to start, listening to where they see the opportunities. And a lot of times they haven't been asked in the past of kind of what they think and where they'd like to see the institution going. And so starting and asking those, all of those different stakeholders, what do you see as the opportunities? What's your vision? Where do you see some of the potential challenges? But being inclusive from the start, I think overall builds a stronger plan, and also gains the buy-in, which they talked about earlier, from the beginning. So those donors, those government stakeholders that you are going to go back and eventually ask money for in your fundraising, they've been part of the process from the beginning, so they can see how this is shaped. And the other thing that we see here is just making sure that there is involvement from your board and from your team from the start. One of the danger signs that we see of any strategic planning process is if it's just exclusively staff driven, or if it's exclusively board driven, or if it's just the CEO wants to say, oh, it's just going to be a couple of us driving this plan. That's a recipe for disaster for us. And being inclusive is really important. The other is setting a bold vision, creating excitement around where the institution and organization can be. So big enough to get that excitement, And again, Zoo Knoxville did this. They came up with some really exciting plans as part of their master plan that got the community excited, but they were big. I mean, $30 million, that was a lot of a big stretch from where they had been. But it was big enough, but also there were steps in place of how to get there. It wasn't we began to break it down into manageable pieces. So setting some reasonable and realistic steps to get there, but having that bold vision. And that also goes kind of to the third piece, which is the priorities of setting priorities. And so when we do a strategic plan, getting back to the process itself, we first start with kind of our discovery phase, which we always like to say is the listening phase. And that's where you include everybody in there and hear from folks. Then you move into opportunities, which is that big thinking and bold vision. Lisa referenced kind of bringing in outsiders into the process. We always like to invite other experts, other folks into the process so that we're not just talking to ourselves as organizations, that we're listening to others and thinking big. And then we move into a reality phase, which is all that's great, but how do we actually start identifying the real priorities? And what we used to see with a lot of plans is they stopped at the big ideas. And you had this, there's dozens of master plans that are in organizations that are up on the wall that are just too big and too bold, but they didn't think about what's that next step. And so that's why we think that reality phase is important. And then the last piece is the action. It's okay, what are the next steps? Fundraising feasibility study, branding campaign, branding plan. What are those different pieces that have to get rolled out? And in a lot of cases, a strategic plan is a plan to plan. It's never ending. You're always kind of in a continual planning mode. And I think for any organization, it's almost like, renovating your house. It's you finish up one piece, you have to go back, after a couple of years, you have to go back and redo it. So it's always planning, always looking at what that future is. So working those pieces together, but kind of those, I think, being inclusive, having that bold vision, setting realistic and sustainable strategies are kind of the keys to success for a planning effort.
Right. And it's like good housekeeping, like you say. And once you've finished over here and you've moved over here, the reason to do it is to continuously reinvigorate, renew, revise what you're doing in response, because we're all nonprofit organizations that serve the community at large. We are legally and literally held in the public trust. And so it is our duty to continuously be evaluating what we're doing to serve the community, what our mission is, how we're delivering on that mission, and continue to provide the very best of the best of what we seek to do to make the planet a little bit better place, right?
Yep.
Which then results in asking for resources to achieve the vision. But so that's that. Thank you for sharing sort of it's 4 easy steps, discovery, opportunity.
Not always easy, but yes, 4 steps.
4 simple steps, right? Right.
And Liz, I'd probably just add in that back to the reality piece. The Zoo Knoxville had a grand vision. I think at the time it was, $80-90 million master planning vision that came out of the strategic plan. And when we took that to fundraising feasibilities in the community said, you can't raise that. You can't raise that. And that's how we set a $30 million goal. Well, $30 million goal didn't address all of the campus needs. But because we had done that assessment, utilizing those key pillars of the strategic plan to evaluate those projects, we were able to go back, look at the look at that evaluation and the money we had to raise and prioritize our projects accordingly. So, we even explored, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to take all of that money and do a redo of Africa? It was like, no, Africa, if you recall, well, you don't know because you don't know the layout, that Africa was designated as a yellow project. It was one that was okay for now, but no, we needed to address those red and urgent priorities and needs. And with $30 million, we couldn't even address all of them. But that was kind of the grounded in reality. There's a big vision, but then what can you really do? And having that master plan be integrated as part of the strategic plan allowed us to be very nimble when we saw what money that we would be able to shoot for.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it was, I don't recall if it was you, Lisa, or if it was David, but in order to say yes to certain things, you have to say no to other things. And so by doing the strategic plan, the master plan, looking at the business plan, it enabled you to be able to know what to say no to and be aligned. It was tempting to redo Africa, but then you needed to go back to your core values and what was really priority based on the guest experience and the welfare of your residents at the zoo to really address different things. And so I love that because you can then put forward a case for support that is both urgent and important, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it helps when you have those donors or funders who say, we want, fortunately, we had people who gave to a vision and not to a
Specific
pet project.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do have those that say, oh, well, I'll give you $5 million, but it's only for X, that's fantastic, but it can create a disjointed and less cohesive overall campus plan. And for us, it was nice to be able to say, and one of our lead volunteer fundraisers, the chair of the capital campaign, always said, even if we had all the money right now to do everything we wanted to do, we would still do it in the order we're doing it. And it wasn't just because of those urgent needs. It was also because a business plan accompanied our master plan as part of that overall strategy. And we were able to say, if we built Africa first, we couldn't sustain it. Mm-hmm. Doing this shows a slow and steady, sustainable growth for our business, which is a key piece of our business or our strategic plan.
And the more solid you are as a business, the more the community and the region will trust you because you are, quite frankly, delivering on your promises, right? So wonderful. Is it all right? I see we've got some questions rolling in, quite a few questions rolling in. And can we shift over to audience questions? Sally, can you join us on camera? I know you've been reviewing the questions as they've been rolling in. What's pressing on people's minds today?
Well, this one is kind of a two-part question, but how were donors involved in the strategic planning process, or were they? How did you wrap in your development staff? And how did you get your board involved without them feeling belittled or insulted? And I'm not quite sure where somebody was coming with that, but how do you get your board feeling like this is a mission we've got to take forward?
Wow. Can we break that back down into two parts?
So,
that was a lot.
Development staff, donors, board.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess I can answer part of that, and I'm sure David's got the benefit of working with many clients. But development staff was key. I mean, the development staff was hand in hand as part of all of this. And I will, put a little plug in for Skystone or whoever your fundraising consultant might be, that as we geared up to fundraise, not only did we do that campus-wide assessment and deep dive of our business, we did a deep dive of our development department, and we had outside help for that. So we looked to audit where we needed, where development strengths were, how they needed to grow, and we incorporated that as part of our overall planning. So we could not have done it, even though fundraising for us was large volunteer based through our board as leading that charge. The development team were the wheels behind the machine, making all of it happen. We made sure that our board didn't have, they had to do some heavy lifting, but we gave them everything they needed to do it, including coaching from Skystone when they needed it. And as a result, our development team became stronger through the process, because we'd never led a capital campaign, so we needed help. And even though now we have done it, as we go into our next campaign, I will still use outside counsel, because it's just we're also in the business of running a zoo, and so having that outside help to keep pushing you along and kind of benchmarking where you need to be as an organization against others is key. And our board was along for the ride from the very beginning. And so that was very unifying. It wasn't insulting to them because they were part of the process. So we had key board members who were part of the strategic planning committee, but then we brought the board in as a whole on multiple occasions to check in and get their input. And then the board was part of the master planning process through our facilities committee. So again, it's all board and leadership driven. And so, you had the zoo's leadership team and key members of the board. And then when we moved into fundraising, same thing. The feasibility studies interviewed board members, it was board led and staff driven. And so all of that created the recipe for success for us. So I don't know, David, what you would add to that.
The only thing I would add is from a donor perspective, we do engage some donors early on in our strategic planning work as part of that initial discovery and listening phase. But we're very clear when we're talking to them, this is not a fundraising feasibility interview. And a lot of times we've gotten into conversations and they're like, well, are you going to ask me how much money or what project? And we're like, no, we're talking about the bigger picture, bigger vision. And we think that's important because, again, it engages them in the thought process along the way and gets them to feel like, oh, you're asking for my opinion before you've already decided what you're going to do. So that's, this is not, we don't do extensive donor interviews, but we do include them as one of the voices as part of the initial parts of a process.
Excellent.
Got another question. So Knoxville Zoo is an already established big organization. You needed to fine tune some things to get going and used outside help. We've got some questions that I've combined into one from smaller organizations. What resources would you recommend? This might be for David, for a strategic plan that would help a smaller or a new nonprofit who are trying to wrap their heads around this whole process and how to get started and how to implement it. What would you say to a relatively new organization that is looking for direction?
I would say you need to get the buy-in from the leadership. And when I say leadership, it's the organization leadership as well as board leadership. And yeah, there is a financial investment to go through this process, but there's also a time investment. And you want your board, you want your staff to be able to put the time in and the thought into this. So I think that's the very first step. And you can take this piece by piece and kind of start with first going through kind of your mission, vision, values work, and then kind of seeing where you are and then moving into the others. We've worked with clients that we've just done mission, vision, values first. And so it does sound big and overwhelming, but just like when you do the final plan, it's break it down into pieces and setting aside the time to do that.
And Sally, if I could chime in, there is a cost involved, of course, a time commitment as well as a financial commitment to having outside experts come in and help. although we were a longstanding organization, financially, we were in a pretty precarious situation. Fortunately, we had a board that believed the investment was an investment in the future. But if you're a really small organization on a shoestring budget, and some of those fees are outside your reach, in many local communities have alliances for nonprofits where you can get strategic planning services. The one piece of advice I would give is don't try to do it by yourself, because we have tried to subsequently facilitate some many strategic plans with our board, and it is so difficult to do. We're not professional unless you have a professional facilitator. We're not professional facilitators ourselves, and me personally, I don't want to be leading and facilitating the discussion. I want to be part of it. And so, you can look to your board, to your community. There are all sorts of opportunities of people who can come in and do that for you on a much smaller scale than we did overall. I have a board member that does strategic planning. He could have led us through that process, but he wanted to be part of it. So I think that there are resources out there that you can reach to and look to help you if a big, full out, completely inclusive consulting service isn't an option for you.
And Lisa, one more thing, or actually Lisa and everybody, one more thing I'd like to add. Skystone Partners is located in Greater Cincinnati, and I believe one of the organizations here in town, similar to what you're describing, Lisa, is OneSource. And so those of you who are in Greater Cincinnati, that's just a little heads up that they can be helpful if you are in a space where it is really outside of your budgetary constraints. Yeah, great. What else do we have today, Sally?
There was also a few questions along the lines of, this seems like such a big process, and it's got to fit in with a master plan and a business plan and then a branding and marketing plan. Talk a little bit about how you balance the appropriate amount of time for strategic planning, as well as executing your job and the tasks that you have to do day to day, and be excellent at both of them.
Well, I'll say one thing quickly and let David chime in on that, but you have to make the time, and you won't make the time if you don't have some outside commitment, whether that's helping you drive the process. So that is why I personally have leaned toward hiring counsel to drive us along and keep us on pace, because there's always a burning platform that needs your attention. But if you have charted out and you have this day set aside to do that work, and somebody's flying in or they coming in from across town to make it happen, and that schedule's been arranged, then it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I would add to that, kind of we provide that facilitation of and kind of pushing you along a bit in the process, and hold you accountable in terms of kind of, here are the different pieces you need to respond to. So as I said just earlier, you do need to make the time, but you also can break it down into manageable pieces. It does sound, all of these things sound overwhelming. And as Lisa would attest, it didn't all happen at once. I mean, this happened, all those different plans happened over many years. And so it's taking it one step at a time. And we feel strongly about starting with that strategic plan. But it's starting there, kind of getting everybody together, and then based on time, resources, moving into, okay, now we can do the master plan, then business planning. But if you look at this with all of these different things, you'll be so overwhelmed you won't do anything.
Right.
And a point of reference for our strategic planning process, it took about 8 to 10 months. So it wasn't something that consumed us. It wasn't something that consumed us in a short term, because we had to go away, do some work and come back. And then so the strategic plan came first, and then that then drove these other processes. So a 5-year strategic plan, the planning piece of it, the strategic plan, and then some of those initiatives starting to get underway while master planning started to occur. Those two things were about a 2-year process in themselves, and then the fundraising took off. So it felt like drinking from the fire hose in a lot of ways, but it was a multi-year effort.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
I'll
I think
just
that's a key point, that it wasn't just a board retreat weekend and boom, you were off and running, that it was a longer process.
Yeah, just one quick thing to add to Lisa's, kind of what we see as a typical strategic planning process is about 8 months, but it's not 8 months that someone has to dedicate 8 months to. There's a couple of workshops in there. It's a couple of days over several months, concentrated time to do it. But you can't rush through this because you need time for thinking, but you also don't want it to go on for a year or more, because you lose steam and momentum.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think one thing I wanted to say before, just about overall success of your fundraising based on strategy. Part of that strategy and that strategic plan really needs to, and I'm afraid this question won't come up, so I want to plug it in, is focusing on the composition of your board. So your board doesn't have to be, and shouldn't be, all fundraisers, all big philanthropic givers. It's great when you have those folks on there. That certainly helps lead the success of a campaign for board giving. But I think one of the successes that Zoo Knoxville had over the implementation of this was being very strategic at looking at the skill sets and tenure of certain board members and plugging them in and having that board recruitment and retention be part of our overall strategy to driving a successful other aspects of the plan, the master plan, the business plan, and the fundraising.
It's an excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up, Lisa. Sally, I think we have time for one more question from our audience here today. Do we have any more
Sure.
in line?
Yep. So we've talked a lot about capital projects in this discussion, but can a strategic plan also address program growth?
Yes, it definitely can get down into those program areas, business areas, people areas. So a strategic plan looks at everything. Yeah, we've spent a lot of time here talking about the physical campus, but a good strategic plan should incorporate all aspects of your organization. In terms of where you want to go from a program standpoint, kind of what areas you want to be known for, take leadership in. I will say one quick thing. The thing that we're hearing more and more on our strategic planning work right now is the focus on the people aspect. And that is a key part of all of our plans that we're doing now.
The people being staff or the people being community, or both?
Both. I would say first from a staff perspective, but then the community as well.
Yeah.
And Sally, if I could just say quickly, I've focused on master planning and campus fundraising because our organization, typically our donor base, the philanthropists that give to the zoo, don't tend to want to give to operational support, but they expect our business and with much earned revenue driving our business, they want us to have a sustainable business. So that's our model. But I realize that there are other cultural attractions, or especially social service organizations, that are thinking, well, I don't have a campus, I'm not fundraising for a building. But they can fundraise for programs and for operational support. So the business model is different, but the concepts are the same.
Lisa, can I build on that a little bit? And I'd like us to actually flip this question on its head, or flip everything on its head. We'll all do headstands together. And really, yes, there were physical representations. You have beautiful tigers, beautiful space for gibbons. The art campus is, world class, amazing stuff. But the only reason that those physical representations exist, the only reason that those buildings exist is because of what you do.
Right.
And it's what you do that drove the building. So fundamentally, and this is where I'd like to ask our audience members to maybe flip it on their head, which is, if you're doing something, you are all doing something remarkable and elevating the quality of life and standard of living on the planet, whether it's for animals or people or plants. But the only reason that the zoo needed buildings was to be able to provide better, more engaging habitat for the animals in their care, was to be able to provide more connection between people and nature. And so they really were, quite frankly, they had big vision that was programmatic. It's just the result of that big vision is a building. And the building happened, but it is important what happens inside the building, not so much the building itself. They're amazing facilities and they're interactive facilities, but the function of those facilities is delivery of the program, of the person's connection with wildlife, of the guest experience. Isn't that a fair assessment also? So the reach between building a building and strategic planning for programs and not building a building and raising money for it, it's not as big a leap as folks might think.
Yeah, I think the really, the title of the talk and, strategic planning and how it fits into your philanthropy is really key to that. So whether you're fundraising for a building or you're fundraising for service support or something in your operations, a program you're trying to develop, all of that's going to be stronger if it's influenced and part of an integrated plan.
Excellent. I couldn't have said it better. We are rounding the bend and heading for home as far as time goes. And I know you all have dedicated a lot of time, David and Lisa, as well as our guests here, and Sally as our moderator. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but we are going to be sending out a synopsis. Any of the questions that didn't get answered in the session, we'll make sure we address that and keep communicating with this group that's been here with us today. I guess as a summary, identifying needs is always paramount. That's first and foremost. If you know what's urgent and compelling, you're going to have an easier time fundraising. Strategic planning is an optimal time to unify, to align, to bring everybody together. And there's really no better way to ensure that the community's needs and interests are being met than to do the planning in a really inclusive kind of a way. And so thank you all. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, David, for your great work, for your insights, and for your time today. Our guests here on our webcast, thanks for coming and for your insightful questions. And we had a lot of them. I hope the session will help you and your organization on into its next phase. And I hope you all will join David and Lisa and me in part 2 of strategic planning and fundraising. How do I know when it's time to start raising the money? On Tuesday, May 9th at 12, same bat time, same bat station. We'll make sure to keep in touch with you so you have the invitation on your calendars. And in the meantime, next month you'll have the opportunity to visit with the Skystone Partners AFP for Philanthropy Prize for Research winner, Tuesday, March 14th. But thank you all for coming. Make sure you do come back again to hear the part 2 from David and Lisa about when you start fundraising and how that all works. So thank you again, David Walsh, Lisa New, for your expertise today. Thank you, Sally, for curating the questions. And thank you to Sam Martin, our executive assistant and office manager, for his technical support and making sure we could all be here together today. Go forth.
Thank you, Liz.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.